So, colleagues, welcome. This is our first masterclass, which is the continuous professional development activity for our senior executive leadership program. And there are three components I want to do with you today. The first, in fact, is just an overview very quickly of what this program is about and the expectations, the time frame, as well as what you'd be required to do over the next 12 months just to comply with our CPD requirements. I do want to say that from a continuous professional development point of view, we will be counting your attendance in the master classes. We will be accounting any of the thought leadership work that we require, which will result from the master classes. And then finally, obviously, any committee work that you're currently involved in. After each of the master classes, you will be sent the presentations made. You will be sent all the supplementary notes as well, and a recording of the CPD workshops. So thank you very much. And as usual, please just unmute your microphone and raise your hand if there's anything you want to engage and discuss on. I just want to very, very quickly go over the fundamental structure of the senior executive leadership designation. It's broken up into management of self, where, as you know, we look at integrity and honesty, interpersonal skill, continuing learning, resilience, oral communication, written communication, flexibility, problem solving. We then look at the management of the projects, where we look at team building, customer service, technical credibility, accountability, decisiveness, and influencing stroke negotiation. And finally, in terms of management of people, we look at your human capital management, leveraging diversity, conflict management, public service motivation, and developing others. From a managing of programs point of view, we look at technology management, financial management, creativity and innovation, partnering in terms of networking, and political savvy in terms of the impact on your business. And finally, we look at leading organizations, external awareness, vision, strategic thinking, and entrepreneurship. The designation lasts for 3 years, and all of those previously discussed leading organizations, managing programs, managing people, and managing projects will in fact be the subject of continuous professional development over that 3-year period. We start this year with our first 6 workshops. I know that when the program was sent out to you, it was sent out for 2025, indicating 5 masterclasses. There is a 6th one at the end of January, remembering that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that 5th bullet point is important. Participants are expected to attend 80% of CPD each year. We've reduced that 80% requirement for this first group to 60% because of the level at which the senior executive leaders operate. The designation lasts for 3 years, during which time we expect you to participate in our networking forum, which are our master classes and any other activities we arrange. The sessions will last a maximum of 2 hours, hopefully 1.5 hours, and the sessions will be held every second month. And during the 3 years, each participant's portfolio will be completed to satisfy all outcomes for the designation within our field of operation. Okay, so I just want to quickly go over the 6 master classes. The first master class, as of today, is a master class on cultivating leadership self-awareness. It sounds wishy-washy. I hope by the end of the day you still think it's wishy-washy. The second masterclass is the role of IQ, EQ, and social in modern leadership. So it's not just intelligence, it's not just emotion, but also it's social in modern leadership. That is current thinking. It's a thinking which is taught in all of our business schools. And in terms of the chartered director requirement of the Institute of Chartered Management, this is a major requirement, this masterclass too. In terms of corporate governance, which is the second focus, corporate governance and policy frameworks, our third masterclass will look at the most latest version of the King Code. That's version 5, King Code on corporate governance. Again, it's requirement of the chartered director designation from the Institute of Chartered Management. The masterclass 4 on the same topic, or not same topic, in the same category of corporate governance and policy, is Navigating South Africa's Legislative Maze, a blueprint for ethical and sustainable leadership in a global context. That, for me, is most probably one of the most operational of all of the masterclasses that we'll be offering this year. Not to say that the others are not operational, but in terms of on the ground operational knowledge activity and your ability to impart that knowledge activity, masterclass is absolutely, masterclass 4 is absolutely essential. In terms of strategy, well, Masterclass 5 looks at mastering the 4 levels of strategy, how emotional intelligence, resilience, and mindfulness drive leadership excellence in terms of strategy. And then Masterclass 6 looks again operationally at your board, your shareholder structure, your director structure. And here we look at the C-suite symphony, exploring leadership dynamics and roles beyond just the CEO, the CFO, and the chief operating officer triad. We look at all of the positions that have to be filled in on your board, irrespective of whether you've got one person doing 3 people's or 3 positions functions, or you have one individual for each of those functions in the larger size companies. Our masterclasses, well, these are the dates for those masterclasses: 18th of March, 13th of May, 15th of July, 16th of September, 18th of November, and then at the end of January, the 28th of January. One of the reasons we carry this over is it's a requirement by the South African Qualifications Authority that our 3-year life of a designation are not linear calendar years, but in fact a bridge year after year after year. And so they carry over on a January to December basis into each successive year. I see Bobby is joining us. Good. So you may ask, well, how are we going to assess you on your attendance, but also on your contribution, on your understanding of what we cover in the various masterclasses? And this is what we have devised based on what the minimal amount of CPD assessment can be in any formal CPD program. And that is, over the course of the next 12 months, we want from you, for your businesses, first and foremost, we want from you thought leadership articles of a maximum of 750 words each. If it was me, I'd say 7,500 words each, but 750 words each. The first being due at the end of June on personal leadership, the second being the end of October on corporate governance, and policy, and the final at the end of February 2026 on strategy. Based on the masterclasses you've attended and based on your reflection of the application of what we've dealt with in the masterclasses in your working environment. What we want to do is we want to take those thought leadership articles then to market. When I say to market, I'm saying you are bastions of excellence in the SAPMA environment. We want everybody else in the SAPMA environment to realize that you are thought leaders in your own respective fields, and we want you to be published widely. And obviously, I will personally give every one of you as much help as you need with the development of those thought leadership articles, with editing the thought leadership articles. And we want them also to go into our annual reports every year, because ultimately, colleagues, at the end of the day, you are the leadership of this sector. And we want to not only recognize you, but we want you to live up to the obligation of leadership. So that is our first discussion. I'd imagine from your perspective, it's relatively straightforward and you're quite happy. Are there any questions or any suggestions or observations from what I just covered? Good. All right. So welcome to this, our masterclass on personal introspection. And this is a masterclass on cultivating leadership self-awareness. The business landscape is evolving rapidly and leadership demands are shifting all the time. I don't need to tell you about that. Here in South Africa, I think it's especially pertinent at this moment in time, given the pressure which as a country we are under politically, but economically as well on a global basis. And in terms of specific instances such as AGOA, such as the African Free Trade Agreement, but also in terms of the South African commitment to the South African development community, not just Africa as a whole. I think that from a leadership point of view, your flexibility as leaders to adapt, I hate using this term, to pivot and to realign your corporate strategy is critically demanding of you all of the time. Technical expertise alone is no longer enough. Interpersonal and strategic skills are absolutely critical. It's for that reason that I would always ask why a company would take anyone under the age of 35 or 40 and elevate them to the C-suite, or in fact put them in senior positions of leadership. And I know I'm sounding like an ageist here, but the reality is this. At a senior executive level in the industry, knowledge of AI, knowledge of technical expertise in terms of chemistry and paint chemistry in particular, just doesn't do it in terms of leadership. A leadership is created out of experiences, a leader is created out of experiences, out of adversity, out of application, out of trial and error. The by name of a good leader is iteration, application again and again and again, and in the process, developing muscle memory, muscle sensitivity. And so, young technical experts, whether they're a chartered accountant, whether they're a chief information officer, if they do not have the benefit of time that they've managed to hone their muscle memory according to, then in fact, they shouldn't be in the C-suite. What's very, very important in terms of this topic is the notion of professional introspection, which is the foundation for developing rare leadership skills. That's not me talking, that's the research talking. The most recent research coming out of Harvard University when it was still Harvard University, and I'm going back 3 years. But the bottom line is this is well researched, good foundation. And by the way, when I mention research in any of the masterclasses, colleagues, if you want to see that research, only too happy for you to drop me a WhatsApp, and in fact, there is a WhatsApp group being formed by Warren as we speak, of those of you who have given your permission for us to include you in the WhatsApp group. I will be posting regular vignettes, regular ideas, regular articles that I come across which might be of benefit for you. But equally, if you have any questions or any requests based on anything I refer to in terms of any of the masterclasses, please feel free to post on that WhatsApp group and we will address straight away. So in this masterclass, I want to explore 7 essential skills for 2025. The first is, and it seems so much of a cliche for me to say this, but the first is listening without interrupting. And again, as I say, it's such a cliche thing to do, but it is so appropriate in terms of any skill, any junior, middle, senior, or executive manager has in the workplace or has to have in the workplace. Sorry, I'm just trying to interrupt. Okay, so active listening fosters respect, fosters trust, and it fosters open communication. Leaders gain deep insight and improve problem solving by listening fully. Adam Grant, someone whose opinions I respect in the world of academia, says this: think again emphasizes challenging biases and encouraging open dialogue. And the idea about a good leader is he challenges or she challenges your own biases before you begin to challenge other people's biases. And certainly here in South Africa, you will have heard the notion of unconscious bias. Normally, it's used in the context of race, but very often it's also used in the context of gender. And I do need to say, and this is a very unpopular notion, it's also used in the notion of ability and disability. particularly physical disability, but extending to hidden disability in the workplace. And I think it's critically important that as you work with your senior managers, your middle managers, and your junior managers in your organization, even if there's only one of each, but as you work with those people and you get a barometer on what's happening in your workplace and a barometer on what's happening in your relationship with your clients and your suppliers, in terms of listening, always listen for obvious bias, challenge obvious bias, and always encourage open dialogue. Grant's Think Again is a book that explores the power of rethinking and unlearning. And by the way, this is Grant on the left-hand side of us. But Adam Grant's Think Again is a book that explores the power of rethinking and the power of unlearning. And a good manager is a person who is prepared to undermine their own assumptions when they've come to the conclusion that they are biased, that they are wrong, that there is no harm, there is no embarrassment in changing. There's no simpler way of putting that. But that's very much what Think Again is really about. He argues that intelligence is not just about how much we know, but about our ability to rethink what we assume to be true. And you're going to find this at the boardroom table, in that C-suite of yours, because you're going to find that you go in with a particular perspective on one or more issues, and that for whatever reason, you're attracting opposition, you're attracting some kind of criticism, you're attracting pushback as you proceed with an agenda item or with a presentation. And if we do not have the muscle memory to reflect, to actually think again, to examine our unconscious biases, and to examine our assumptions. And Tara pointed this out to me the other day, that assumptions simply mean you're making an ass of you and me at the same time. But the bottom line is, if we do not have that ability to examine our unconscious bias, then we're not a good leader. We've not honed our leadership skill to be responsive, reflective, and to be able to reframe. And that's critically important in a good leader. Grant emphasizes that leaders must approach conversations with the mindset of a scientist, curious, willing to be wrong, and open to new information. In fact, and I should do that, if I redid my business card, it would be Ivor Blumenthal, curious, willing to be wrong, and open to new information. Because for me, that is a tenet to live by as a senior executive leader. That's equally the tenet that should be inculcated into the culture of your company, to the extent that you have the opportunity in that company to groom your junior, your senior, and your middle managers in your organization. It is a problem across races, because from a cultural point of view, what happens in a white community in terms of openness to ask for feedback, to embrace feedback, and then to be willing to be wrong is different in terms of African culture in South Africa. If you're looking for two absolutes, it would be those two cultures. In the sense that within the Caucasian culture, it's very much a case of curiosity does describe great leaders, but willingness to be wrong in a Caucasian cultural context is sometimes a work in progress, but certainly being open to new information sometimes can be excessive in a Caucasian culture. Whereas within an African culture, and by the way, I'm referring to research here, but within an African culture, Curiosity is very definitely present. Willingness to be wrong is almost instinctive and muscle memory to the extreme. And so, from a senior management perspective, if you have or rather from an executive management perspective, if you have a senior manager reporting to you who is African, and by the way, the research indicates particularly male African, what you tend to have in that cultural dynamic of Caucasian to African is sometimes an African senior manager reporting to an executive manager who bends over unnecessarily, who compromises unnecessarily, and who makes concessions unnecessarily because of cultural influence rather than necessarily because it's the right thing to do in that. So what's critically important in terms of that management dynamic and that management relationship is ensuring and making sure that you do not have a culture of enforcing civility and subservience and perpetuating what many authors refer to as a slave mentality in the culture of your management structure of your business, because it doesn't do anyone any good to have that relationship of servitude. Does no one any good. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Active listening fosters respect, trust, and open communication. Leaders gain deeper insight and improve problem solving by listening fully. So, the scientist's mindset versus unhelpful thinking modes is one area of application of active listening without interrupting. The notion of avoiding preacher mentality, where basically you're defending your beliefs, or prosecutor mode, where your intent, it's part of your makeup to prove other people wrong so that you can validate your own perspective, or politician mode, saying what's popular rather than what's right. The notion of wanting to be liked in the workplace, particularly amongst managers, it's a big, big problem here in South Africa. So instead, what's proposed is the adoption of the scientific mode, the notion of continuously testing beliefs with evidence and new perspectives. And this is great to do in a team of managers on agenda-based issues. So not on wishy-washy soft skills, but on real issues that you need to grapple with in the boardroom or at an executive level with your management team in the workplace. The whole notion of encouraging open dialogue. Leaders who rethink their views create a psychologically safe space for honest discussion, fostering problem solving and fostering innovation. The notion of creating that psychologically safe space is critically important if you're not a micromanager. In other words, if you don't want to do the jobs of your senior, your middle, and your junior managers yourself, because you're never going to be effective doing that. And those people are going to trust you less and less and less if they see that level of micromanagement taking place in your workplace. So the notion of encouraging open dialogue is not a nice to have. It's an absolutely critical. The notion of challenging biases, where leaders must recognize confirmation bias, where you have to look for validating information before you actually live your assumption. And desirability bias, which is sometimes even worse, believing what you want to believe to be true, irrespective of the evidence that you're facing or that you're faced with or is presented to you. A good leader, and this is difficult, particularly in terms of this culture, this bravado culture of South Africa, But a good leader is someone who actively seeks dissenting opinion and engages in diverse discussions to broaden his own perspective, let alone the perspective of his managers. And I use the term in this regard when I'm working in leadership teams of this being the on Sally. I am going to posit a view or a theory or a model to you as my management team. But I expect you to shoot it down. I expect you to tell me what's right and what's wrong about the model. And I expect you to come with your suggestions in terms of how we can complement the model so that when we do go out to a client or to a supplier or to the world at large, we're doing it on the basis of engagement and agreement, not acquiescence. If I find that you as my team are simply agreeing with me because you want to be liked by me, it's not going to work in this business. I will only like people who have the courage enough to challenge me, to present me with alternative points of view, and to present me with evidence of that alternative point of view. Those are the people I will like. But the people I will detest are huntlangers or people trying to suck up to me or people who just want to be yes men or yes women. There is no space in this business for a yes man or a yes woman. You're paid to make a critical contribution in this workplace, and that's what I expect from you. The notion of relearning is critically important. It's relearning where you say, I was wrong, or I didn't really think this thing through. This is the information that you, as my managers, have brought to me, or this is the information that additional research has revealed for me. These are my assumptions that I recognize to be outdated. And so from a relearning point of view, this is what I'm internalizing. Now, obviously, you don't do it in that language, but that is the intention of relearning continuously from morning to night in everything you do. I've been known to say that if a leader is 15% correct as a result of proper engagement, that's a lot. If I've got 15% of my assumptions validated, my thinking validated in my pocket, then sacrificing the outdated, the wrong 85% of what I think I know has been a massive lesson. Especially if I'm mindful to that lesson, I'm able to internalize it and I am able to replicate it as part of my muscle memory going forward. Active listening leads to better decision making. Leaders who rethink set a precedent. Leaders who rethink set a precedent for adaptability and for resilience. Encouraging rethinking fosters innovation. It helps organizations navigate change effectively. So the second skill that I want to deal with is admitting when you're wrong. Owning mistakes, demonstrating humility, courage, and a commitment to growth. It sounds much easier than it is. Brené Brown, that's her on the left-hand side. She wrote a book called Dare to Lead. And in that book, she emphasizes that vulnerability is not a weakness. It's a leadership superpower. And I know in our South African biltong mania, we don't want to own up to the notion of being vulnerable. And we really feel that the term superpower is it's very wishy-washy. But think about it. If nothing else, it is the great multiplier in your toolbox of tricks. Brené Brown argues that courageous leadership requires embracing uncertainty, so not running away, not fearing uncertainty, but moving towards uncertainty and through uncertainty. It's about embracing risk, being prepared to take a risk, but a calculated, a mindful risk, and about emotional exposure rather than avoiding uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. For a male, it's about being a metrosexual. For a female, and again, I'm going back to research. This is not me speaking, but for a female, it's about moderating especially in the C-suite and in the boardroom. Those of you, particularly, I think, in the banking sector, those of you who've been at the boardroom table in the banking sector, where there are a significant number of females who are in that boardroom, will know that there is, on occasion, that there are people who are ridiculously assertive, ridiculously dominant, and ridiculously Amazonish. And so their leadership style is very often ruling by fear. And in a female, and research shows this, it comes from having always come from a backward position in terms of equality and parity in the workplace and then at the boardroom. This notion of you having to be more of a man than the men around the boardroom table to be able to compete. It's a ridiculous notion. It goes against all current thinking and modern theory of leadership, but it is equally a reality. So as vulnerable as men at the boardroom table need to become, so that vulnerability needs to be reflected throughout all genders at the boardroom table, of which we're told there are now only 2 genders at the boardroom table. But the bottom line is that if I'm a female, I think about this notion, this continuum between being absolutely vulnerable because of where I've come from to being absolutely Amazonish. And if I'm a male, I think of the same continuum where the equivalent of being Amazonish in a male context is being absolutely brazen, dogmatic, and bullying. But that vulnerability is the other end of that same range or that same spectrum. And only you will know this about yourself and where you fit on that range. Only you will know this about yourself and where you fit on that range. By acknowledging your own limitations, your own fears, and your own failures, leaders create trust, psychological safety, where your teams are able to feel secure so that they can engage with you, to pipe up and tell you that there's a better way, or they think you're wrong, or there's research, and for you not to get defensive. And here we're talking about the following concepts: the notion of vulnerability as a leadership strength, building trust and psychological safety, where there are 4 courageous leadership skills. And again, these all sound like cliches, but when you start to think about them and internalize them in your own makeup and how you behave in the workplace, but particularly around the boardroom table, and especially within your management teams, the notion of rumbling with vulnerability, open, honest conversation, living into values, aligning your actions with your principles. How often do you think to yourself about somebody else, the person I know in private is just not the same person I'm seeing in public? So aligning your actions and your principles is a critical leadership skill. We're not taught to do that in school. We're not taught to do that in university. We're not taught to do that in the real world of work. But those guys who are able to do it, a massive, massive leadership advantage. Trust is built through repetition. Trust is built through consistency. It's built through an iteration again and again and again of dealing with similar situations in consistent ways, so that your people know what they can expect from you. They can be honest enough with you, And your response can be consistent in response to that honesty. And finally, in terms of courageous leadership, the notion of you learning to get up, to rise, to develop resilience after setback. It sounds so trite to say that, but it's trite or it's a cliche because it's so true and it's so pervasive and it's so applicable in so many situations with so many people. So the notion of learning to rise, to get up, to pivot, to examine what's happened, to examine your options, to inform your options, critically important. I've seen companies go to the wall where leaders are knocked down. They don't do these things. They don't learn these things about themselves and their own decision-making process. And so in the process, they don't rise, they simply repeat. Because rising implies improvement, an improvement factor every time. It's about you literally drawing your own step ladder of where you've come from, what's knocked you off that step ladder. And as you've got back, whether or not you've climbed higher and higher on the step ladder, or you've simply been coming back to the same level on that step ladder. And importantly, from a developmental point of view, how you manage to inculcate that as muscle memory in your employees, particularly your junior, your middle, your senior, and your executive management levels within your company, will determine whether or not your companies become resilient because of your leadership style and because of the culture of leadership and management within your organization. Number 4, in terms of admitting when you're wrong, is the power of admitting mistakes, demonstrating humility and accountability. The kinds of things you want to see in your children as they grow into adults. The same kind of thing you want to see in your managers has to be reflected in the mirror when you look at yourself. Encouraging a growth mindset and a learning culture within your organization. And not in a twee way, not in a way which is a cliche, which is trite, but you will know how your people learn, how they develop so that they stop making mistakes, so that they learn from their mistakes, and they're empowered because of their mistakes. So encouraging that growth mindset is absolutely critical because it strengthens your credibility and your relatability and your reliability as a senior leader. Number 5 is critically important. It's about cultivating a feedback culture in your workplace where leaders must give and receive feedback openly. And it starts, colleagues, with your performance appraisal system in the workplace. If you do not have a performance appraisal in place that allows you to sit with the people who report to you directly, who then sit with the people that report to them directly, who then sit with the people that report to them directly, and you're all doing the same thing. You have a mechanism of providing feedback, a mechanism of listening to a response to the feedback you've provided, and a mechanism of agreeing on next steps. If you have not cultivated that culture of feedback within your organization, you're not a fantastic leader. Effective feedback, simple. It's clear, it's constructive, it's empathetic. But it's resolved to improve performance or behavior. And it's very clear what happens if performance or behavior doesn't improve. It needs to be honest conversations which drive your personal and your team growth. So finally, on this point, vulnerable leaders build stronger connections. Open dialogue enhances collaboration and innovation. And when you embrace vulnerability and the people who report to you embrace their vulnerability, the entire organization is able to navigate change. And we're fortunate that we've actually lived through 2020 to 2022 because we've lived through an opportunity and a necessity of having to do exactly what is pointed out to you in point number 6 here. Vulnerable leaders build stronger connections. Colleagues, we're all in the boat together. COVID has hit us. We're going to have to take a short-term knock, but we'll come back stronger. Open dialogue enhances collaboration and innovation. So we can't see people face to face, but we can get onto Zoom. How's that going to affect our relationship with them? What do we need to do over and above Zooming with these people to keep that relationship strong? And from a vulnerability point of view, I don't want any of you to hide your feelings and your emotions because we're going through a very emotional time now. But we all have to together navigate change. I want this company to become known as a company that has a sense of sensitivity to its employees, to its suppliers, and to its clients. So I'm sure you've all seen pictures of Simon Sinek. Here's the guy on the right. And he's written a number of books. One of them is entitled Leaders Eat Last, which provides a very compelling argument for why acknowledgement and trust are vital in leadership. And he talks about the introduction of the circle of safety, because it's there where you want to give credit where credit is due. The role of leaders is creating a secure and a trusting environment. When employees feel protected, when they feel valued, they're more engaged, they're more innovative, and they're willing to contribute beyond their job descriptions. He argues that great leaders prioritize the needs of their teams, ensuring that employees feel supported. I think we saw some really heroic stuff in 2020 and 21 of great leaders who went to the wall, put their houses up, put their assets up, didn't take salaries so that their employees could survive. And that's really the ultimate of what Sinek is talking about in his book, Leaders Eat Last. It forms a psychological safety environment, a safety net. Individuals unafraid to take risks, express ideas, or make mistakes without the fear of punishment. When recognition is embedded into leadership practice, it builds stronger bonds within that team and it enhances overall performance. So, what are the 5 factors here? Well, acknowledgement boosts motivation and loyalty. Recognition builds trust and builds engagement. And trust reduces stress, boosts creativity, and improves teamwork. Effective leaders credit others. True leadership prioritizes team success over personal recognition. But there are times when an effective leader will turn around to someone in their team and say, "We came from a deficit, and what you did was put us in a positive financial situation. This is what you did to get us into that positive financial situation. And 4 years later, we are still in a positive financial situation." Instead of delegating a significant activity, a significant event out to an event manager or a public relations person, because the sales from that event were so critical to your department and to this company, you went out and you made those sales yourself when it wasn't in your job description to do. You went over and above. Effective leaders credit other people. You started in a department that had 10 people. You managed to narrow that down to 5. You cut your staff complement by 50%. And yet the productivity levels of your contribution as a department have gone up by 300-400%. And that's reflected in the budget and in the financial figures. Effective leaders credit other people in the organization. Authenticity matters. Genuine, specific praise is more impactful than generic compliments. Your subordinates, the people you manage, the people you lead into battle, will know whether you are being genuine or disingenuous in terms of how you're praising them and how you're recognizing their contribution. They're not stupid. They're not idiots. They know when you are sugarcoating something, even if it's criticism. So, in terms of authenticity, critically important, recognition should always align with company values. Always. Celebrating wins strengthens morale. We have a tendency in the old South African culture. Let's say that we're all refreshed metrosexuals now. But we have a tendency in the old South African culture to throw blame out when it comes to failures and defeats and stumbling blocks, but to keep very close to our heart our wins, our recognition, and often to take credit for the contribution of others. So stupid. As a good leader, you are neutralizing the benefit of recognizing excellence in your company. What you've got to gain is so much more when you throw it out there, that recognition, that acknowledgement of accomplishment to everybody in the team, than when you keep it for yourself. Because when you keep it for yourself, everybody knows that you're essentially an arsehole. Excuse my language, ladies. But I can't tell you the number of times I see that old South African mentality creeping in. And the irony is, it's got nothing to do with race. It creeps in amongst all races who get into positions of power and dominance in the workplace. And there are some very practical ways to give credit. Appreciate the person, their name. Send them a note, give them a message, have a conversation with them, with other people around, so that they are uplifted in the process of you recognizing their contribution. Publicly recognize them. Shout out in meetings, newsletters, social media. A good company has a social media campaign that doesn't just focus on what it achieves, but who are the ones achieving those things. Leadership roles, mentorship, and training are growth opportunities, not just for yourself as the senior leader in a business, but for the rest of your management team. From junior managers who need to grow into senior and into middle and senior managers, as much as for senior managers who need to grow into executive management positions. But I can't tell you the number of times I've found companies that send executive managers on MBAs in Singapore, Mauritius, even to Europe, but have no intention of democratizing those opportunities, even if they're part opportunities, all the way down the management spectrum. Stupid. Because what it means is you're keeping far more responsibility amongst fewer and fewer and fewer people in your company. It's just plain stupid. So leaders should integrate recognition into their style of high performance culture. Consistent, meaningful recognition drives engagement, drives retention, especially of the significant people in your company, and ultimately drives the success of your organization. It's about things that you can include in your annual general report, things you can include in your social media campaigns. It's about remarks you can make to your customers and your suppliers about who in your business are centers of excellence beyond yourself, so that they have a consistent trust in your organization that if you fall under the bus or you don't come back from that MBA that you've done in Mauritius, somebody else can take over. And finally, in this regard of giving credit where it's due, A culture of appreciation strengthens individual and organizational growth. So before we go to skill 4 of our 7 skills, let me throw the floor open to you and just ask you for some of your observations and comments, colleagues. Anybody want to go first?
Hi, Iva. It's Prashini.
Hello, Prashini. Long time no hear.
I say lots of valid points, and listening without interrupting I found was very interesting because that goes across all areas, whether it's selling skills or talking in a meeting, and listening without interrupting is actually one of the critical points, eh?
Prashini, let me ask
And
you a question, and it's an uncomfortable question. And you and
yeah,
Tara can both shut me down here. But do you find that when you sit at a senior level in your organization, the way of listening is sometimes very different if you look at the males and the females in the room?
it's true. It's true. It's a very different way of listening because if you're sitting in and you find also if you're in a senior level meeting, you'll find some of the senior level management, you can see who has the listening skills and who don't. If you observe, it's very clear.
Thank you for that. Bobby, I see you've unmuted your microphone.
Yeah, no, hi, thanks. Now I was just reflecting on the recognition part, and that's every day in leadership positions, having to recognize your people is very, very important. And I find that in my role with leading so many disciplines in my function, I can't tend to do everything all by myself. And the only way I'm able to achieve some of the things I achieve is through the people that I have in my team. And resonating with what you're saying on recognizing is important for me because that's what I'm looking for to do more and more in my side is how do I recognize my people more and more and give them more and more opportunities within my team because I realize the more I give them opportunities to shine and develop, the easier it actually makes my role in my organization. So I actually resonated quite a lot with that part of your talk.
You know, in terms of recognition, I heard a very good podcast the other day, and it was between two people having a discussion on the notion of recognition. And the one guy turned around to the other and said, I think that the reason that recognition is so superficial in some companies is because of the notion that you have to commoditize recognition. So recognition without reward doesn't have value anymore. The notion of being recognized as a center of excellence within a team of others doesn't have the same value anymore as opposed to putting money behind it or some kind of a prize or some kind of reward behind it. And so we've commoditized recognition to the extent that we've taken the impact and the meat out of the very activity of recognizing someone for their excellent contribution or their excellent behavior. I mean, what is your thinking in that regard, Bobby?
Um, yeah, monetizing reward is always great, but in with most organizations these days it's become more and more difficult. So you have to look at other ways to recognize. And also you got to understand what motivates the individual with regards to recognition, because different people want different things. Yes, some people want, monetary recognition, but other people want to be amongst their peers to know that, they've done a great job or they're doing well. That peer recognition is very important, and I find that to be quite powerful. And that doesn't cost us anything. It's about listening to an individual, just elevating them, in a team meeting or in something, in some way or shape or form, and that you can do easily. You can do that in any number of shape, ways, or forms, and it doesn't depend on something else. It's purely within your control. And therefore, I think recognition that is purely within your control for yours, for the people that work with you, is something that you should be able to, as a leader, be able to give when it's due.
I, 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 I read an article about parenting and good and bad parenting, and the notion of a father who says to a son, if you get an A for your test or your exam, I will pay you 1,000 rand. For every A you get, I'll give you 1,000 rand. And so the notion is that recognition being commoditized at the very earliest ages of people being developed is what creates a culture of expecting reward for recognition beyond the recognition itself. And so I think that has to do with societal values, and it has to do with how we bring up children and how we have been raised as children. But we need to be mindful enough to ask ourselves about that system of recognition and reward in our company, and if we get to a stage where it's ever going to be enough. I see this in wage negotiations where you make a concession in year one and it becomes expected in year two, and to build on in terms of what is the reward from year two onwards. That it's never enough once you start commoditizing recognition. So it's something to bear in mind. Good. Aggie, I see
Yeah,
you've
sorry.
unmuted your
Yeah,
microphone.
Yeah.
I've unmuted my microphone. I think your presentation is very good so far, Iva. But I will say one thing about the gender thing. My daughter's an advocate, as I've told you before, and she finds it very not difficult, but she stands her ground. She's not a person who keeps quiet. But she says she notices in the courts, especially in the area that live in, here in Pretoria, the male thing is very dominant.
Mm.
And and I won't say totally disregard women, but they tackle them much harder than what they would a male opposition in court. And that is a big problem in South Africa. The male seems to dominate and look down upon women. And I think it's shouldn't be like that anymore, because the world's progressed from there. And then the other thing is admitting when you're wrong. A lot of people won't do that. They just don't want to say they're doing wrong, and they'll always find an excuse. But I think I agree there that a good leader will admit he's wrong. It's very important to your staff, because they see that you make mistakes, and making mistakes is not totally condemnable, if I can use that word. I don't know if it's the right word there.
In other words, there's no recourse. There's no consequence. It is a problem. I mean, Aggie,
There's no
as you're
recourse.
talking about your
Yeah.
daughter in courts in Pretoria, it takes me back to the days when I was in training in law, and I clerked for a judge, and we appeared often in the Pretoria Supreme Court. And I remember that the president of the Pretoria Supreme Court at the time, and I'm going back many decades now, a guy called De Villiers, Judge De Villiers. And when he had a woman appearing for him, he would start off by, and this is a formal court, but he would start off with saying to the woman, "Hello, Liefie, hoe lyk dinge by die huis?" Hello, sweetheart, how are things at home? And if I tell you that the number of times that he was almost found in contempt for just making those statements, because he was known to make those statements. And by the way, he made those statements about other people, not just women, which got him into a lot of trouble. But 100%, you're completely correct about the culture and the mentality, which crosses racial divides in the Supreme Court, certainly, but also in the Magistrates Court to some extent in Pretoria. But thank you for that. Okay, colleagues, let's move on. Let's move on now to skill number 4. And this is the idea of making decisions without overthinking. And the picture on your screen is of Daniel Kahneman. And Daniel wrote a book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which explores when to trust intuition versus deliberation. where he says that overanalysis can lead to missed opportunities. What's it? Analysis paralysis. The idea that you can be so paralyzed by seeing all the sides, seeing all the possible consequences, that you just are inactive. You are immobile. You are not able to actually put one foot in front of the other until you've got some momentum. So leaders have to balance data with experience and with intuition in terms of time frames for timely decisions. And that is, again, muscle memory. It's being able to, and the best person I've seen in this regard operating in the boardroom is Judge Mervyn King, especially around negotiations on King 1 and King 2, where in fact he would always know when to call it, when to call a discussion, when to make a unilateral intervention so that you could move on. And making decisions without overthinking, critically important. And what Kahneman says in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is he says this: number one, there are two thinking systems. A fast thinking system, which is intuitive, it's automatic, it's efficient for routine tasks, but it is very prone to bias. So there are some things where you can think fast, some issues you can think fast about, where it's about routine challenges, routine issues. And then there's system two, which is the slow thinking system, where you need to be informed, deliberate, logical, and it's essential for complex decision making when it comes to system two, where you are able to be deliberate, informed, so you've got research backing up your thinking, you're logical. So there are two thinking systems that Kahneman talks about. And he talks about in system one, when to trust your intuition. It works well for routine decisions, for pattern recognition. I've seen this before, we've dealt with it before, and this is what's worked and this is what's not worked. It's reliable. So fast thinking is reliable when based on expertise and experience. And expertise only comes from experience. The more mistakes you make and the longer you live to tell the tale, the more of an expert you become. That's how someone becomes an expert. Mistake after mistake after mistake, but fewer and fewer consequences. That's what makes you an expert. We're not born experts. You can't make an expert overnight. You can't pull someone out of university and expect them to be an expert. Experience is more important in leadership positions than technical expertise. But fast thinking system one, fast thinking systems are risky when influenced by biases or emotional reaction. So when an engagement with your managers or with your staff, with your suppliers or with your customers becomes highly emotionally charged so that it galvanizes people into camps, then you know this is time for a system two approach. We need to go back to deliberate, informed, and logical rather than intuitive, automatic, and efficient. When do you use deliberate thinking? System number two. Well, if it's necessary for high stakes, unfamiliar, and complex decision making. You need to take time. You need to give yourself time. It needs to be informed. You need to do your research properly. Deliberate thinking helps evaluate conflicting information and avoids errors in your thought patterns, giving yourself more time to examine your assumptions, to examine your responses, to examine your response to other people in the dynamic, in the room, in the negotiation. So there are classic ways of applying system one thinking and system two thinking in terms of how we take action and when we take action. That balance is a balance of intuition and analysis. You can only train intuition through experience. You need to learn to pause before reacting in critical situations. Something I need to keep telling myself. You need to seek diverse input from different sources who you don't necessarily always agree with to counter your own bias. And I find that in negotiations with trade unions, this is constantly the case. I have a very sort of superficial view of who a trade union negotiator is and even a shop steward is. And until I understand where they're coming from, it's very difficult for me to understand that point they're making. So when they talk about cultural leave, for example, and we're having a negotiation on a very superficial basis because employers are trying to cut costs and employees are trying to get something else out of that working relationship, which I suppose is more trust and is more dependable and is more supportive. Those biases creep in very, very quickly. So the opportunity or the necessity to go back and re-examine your own biases during either a System 1 or a System 2 engagement, I think is critically important. And you should always have your own wire architecture for how you deal with coming to decision making in your head, because it's muscle memory. It's a sensitivity. We've been in a situation before. This is how we dealt with it. If we apply the same principles again, will we have the same outcome? So use decision making frameworks that you've taught yourself intrinsically to use internally. Leaders must know when to rely on instinct versus analysis. And it's not that easy. You need to be aware of your cognitive biases, and you need to cultivate a mentality amongst your managers, certainly, of critical thinking, which builds adaptability, but leads to effective leadership. The fifth area that we want to examine is giving honest feedback with compassion. Now, this is Kim Scott on the right-hand side in red. Constructive feedback is essential for growth, but has to be delivered with empathy. Again, empathy is not something that the average, and I'm going to say this again, the average male South African manager at the junior, the middle, the senior, even the executive level is comfortable with, let alone being empathetic, but the notion of showing empathy. Because one always has at the back of one's mind, I believe, the idea that if we are showing empathy, we will be abused in a relationship with an employee or with another manager. She wrote a book called Radical Candor, which provides a practical framework for leaders to give honest, constructive feedback while maintaining the relationship. She argues that effective leadership is about balancing directness with empathy. Empathy doesn't mean agreeing. Empathy doesn't mean giving in. It means I understand where you're coming from. It fosters a culture of open communication and continuous improvement, iteration. So in terms of radical candor and her framework, she says this: there are 4 feedback styles. The one is ideal. It's what she calls radical candor. It's number 10 on her scale of 1 to 10 of how to give feedback. You challenge directly while you care personally. You challenge directly on the issue. You play the ball, not the person. But you're able to actually care personally so that the person doesn't focus on how you're giving feedback, but rather what the feedback is. Honest, constructive feedback with empathy fosters trust and fosters growth. Then there's the too soft empathy. It's called ruinous empathy. Blunt, harsh feedback, which damages morale and trust and the interpersonal relationship. Soft is avoiding difficult conversations, leads to confusion, leads to stagnation. So ruinous empathy is when you're being too wishy-washy. You're avoiding having a difficult conversation. You're creating massive confusion. And there's massive cognitive dissonance. Because what is this guy trying to say to me as my manager? It's getting lost in how he keeps telling me it's not you, it's me kind of thing, rather than just getting to the bottom line of what I've done wrong. It leads to confusion, it leads to stagnation. Then obnoxious aggression is the feedback that's too harsh. What I was saying is blunt, harsh feedback, which damages the morale and the trust in that relationship. You're giving feedback which is too harsh only when the relationship is broken down irretrievably and you're wanting to get it onto record. So when counseling has become written counseling and the first stage of discipline, that's when there is any kind of justification for feedback that is far too harsh. And the worst kind of feedback is manipulative insincerity, false praise, avoiding real feedback, and disengagement. The result is always going to be disengagement with that kind of feedback. False praise, avoiding real feedback, and it's disengagement not only by the person you're counseling, but very often by everybody else who realizes that you're afraid of the person you're giving feedback to. You're afraid of losing them. You don't know how to retain them. You don't know how to give them constructive feedback without them deciding to resign. Worst kind of feedback. So this radical candor scale moves from one, which is manipulative insincerity, to two, which is in some situations justified, but it's obnoxious aggression, to three, which is far too soft and it's ruinous empathy, to four, which is ideal. It's radical candor. Challenge directly while caring personally. Leaders need to be clear and specific. They need to show empathy. They need to encourage open dialogue. And they need to give feedback so regularly and so consistently that it becomes automatic for your subordinate to expect radical candor. I know you're never going to lie to me. And I appreciate the fact that you're empathetic and you always see where I'm coming from. So I'm prepared to accept your criticism of me. That's ideally the optimum leadership style. Leaders who balance honesty with empathy create high trust, high performance teams. Constructive feedback enhances engagement, enhances accountability, and enhances innovation. Radical Candor is a very good book that I could recommend. Skill number 6, saying no. Well, I recently wrote an article on 12 effective skills of great negotiators. And this thing about saying no is so critical. It is something we are so afraid of as negotiators and as leaders, but it is so critical in those roles. So Greg McKeown, and that's on the left-hand side, wrote a book, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. And he talks about prioritizing, which is crucial for leadership effectiveness. Knowing what's important in terms of priorities and what's unimportant or less important. And saying no to distractions preserves focus on strategic objectives. It's a strategic approach which helps leaders focus on what truly matters, and it eliminates distractions. Essentialism is not about doing more, but about doing the right things exceptionally well. And so there are 4 concepts to essentialism. Less but better, where success comes from focusing on fewer tasks with greater impact. Spreading too thin, leading to burnout and efficiency, is something you need to avoid. And saying yes only to the critical meetings, to the critical discussions, to the critical expenditure, as opposed to the nice to haves. Very difficult for a manager who wants to be liked, especially a senior manager, but crucial in the C-suite. There are 4 pillars. Eliminate non-essential tasks. Set boundaries where you can say no gracefully to distractions and protect time for priorities. Make trade-offs deliberate. Every yes is a no to something else. I cannot do everything. So because I want to say yes here, I have to say no to the following two other items which are less of a priority. It's a yes is an investment, but equally a no is also an investment. In research, it's called the null hypothesis. If we can disprove something on our list of priorities, we've learned something. So every yes is an investment, and every no is equally and also an investment. And you have to create routines for efficiency. Automate or simplify decisions, which allows you to focus on high value work. It's the difference between doing this, between having a to-do list in your diary and then having appointments to do specific things in your diary. And we're so used to putting everything into a to-do list and not dividing that list up from the routine stuff that is almost automatic, low-hanging fruit kind of stuff, or essential stuff, but not critical to my functioning. And then taking, let's say, a list of 10, taking the 4 things or the 3 things which are absolutely critical to progress, to productivity, to profitability. And if you've got those things on your list, taking them out of the to-do list and literally booking an hour's time in your diary between meetings for each of those things, and then beginning the hour and concluding the hour only on that thing without all of the other things that are deviating your mind and your attention. So creating a routine between what's on a to-do list and your essential appointments so that you're taking it out of the to-do list and you're focusing only on that thing. Your mind is only focused on that thing without distraction, whether it's for a half an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour. And if it has to be done routinely, that you're making that booking on the same issue that you're investing that time into, learn each time. Am I reserving too much time, too little time? Learn that about how that muscle memory of the yes appointments in your diary as opposed to the to-do list in your diary. How leaders can apply essentialism. Prioritize high impact tasks over reactive low value work. Delegate effectively to focus on what only you can do, your strategic decision making. Say no without feeling guilty. Aligning your effort with your long-term goals. So that other people might not see that because of my no's, I know I'm not sacrificing my long-term goals, but they might think I'm sacrificing the long-term goals of this business. You might ask that question currently about Donald Trump and Elon Musk, because they're taking a lot of flack. The economy is taking somewhat of a downward spiral in the States because of what they're doing. But do they have the long-term goal? Is what they're focusing on the really important strategic thing that will eventually turn with a much higher uptick or not? It's only taken 6 weeks to get to this point, so let's give it another 6 weeks to say to see where it's going. Foster a culture of focus and intentional work. You with your own tasks, your team with their own particular tasks, and collectively as a team. Foster that culture. Essentialist leaders are more productive, focused, and effective. Organizations that eliminate distractions perform better with less burnout. And disciplined prioritization ensures that time is spent on what truly drives success. So as Greg McCowan says, essentialism, saying no to protect your focus, critically important skill. And the final skill we're working on today is this: defending your team. Advocating for your team builds trust and builds resilience. Patrick Lencioni wrote this. He wrote a book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. which provides a framework for understanding the key challenges that prevent teams from reaching their full potential. It emphasizes trust. Yes, we know that. Everybody else in 1 to 6 has told us that. And advocacy, being the ambassador for your team, for individuals in your team, and for your company, are the critical foundations of effective teamwork. And leaders play a critical role in fostering a healthy team dynamic. And here he deals with the following 5 dysfunctions, things that can go wrong in your team. Absence of trust, where team members avoid vulnerability, idea sharing, admitting mistakes, and there's huge miscommunication and fear of failure. And the solution, leaders have to model, they have to show, they have to behave in an authentic way, where they're fostering open dialogue with their staff. The second is a fear of conflict. This is where dysfunction creeps into your team. Avoiding conflict, which stifles meaningful discussions and decision making. It causes resentment and passive aggressiveness. Leaders, as a solution, need to focus on creating a safe space for constructive debate and diverse viewpoints, where people are not going to be punished for what they express. And the third dysfunction is a lack of commitment. Without trust and debate, teams struggle to align on decisions, and there's no buy-in. So leaders must ensure clear goals, roles, and expectations, and test them with the members of the team. Is this the way you see it, or am I missing something? Number 4, avoidance of accountability. You know, when there's a problem and you call everybody together and you say, right now, who did this? And no one puts their hand up. Some people are looking at somebody else in a very suspicious way, but no one puts their hand up. So no one's prepared to take accountability for problems and therefore for the solutions. Where there's a lack of commitment, which results in low performance standards, missed deadlines, and huge frustration. So leaders must set clear expectations, and they must encourage peer accountability. The 5th area of dysfunction is inattention to results, ignoring results. Teams that prioritize individual success over collective goals become disengaged. I'm less interested in what we accomplished as a department than I am about my own targets and how I'm going to be rewarded. So leaders have to create shared objectives and then champion and, yes, reward shared objectives. So a national sales director doesn't get commission on deals that he himself facilitates. He gets commission on the collective amount of deals that are done in his department compared to last month and this time last year and the year before. So only when his team members are performing collectively will he be rewarded. And similarly, a national sales director only gets commission if his entire team, the 10 people in his team, are all within 70% of their own personal targets. So that's how you deal with collective results positively. Number 6, the 6th area of dysfunction, the role of trust and advocacy in leadership. Leaders must advocate for their teams. They must give them support. They must give them resources, and they must give them public recognition. It strengthens commitment, it reduces fear, and it drives success. Now, in terms of, Tara, you've got your hand up. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to remind you of time. You've
I
got
know.
until 1:30.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate your reminder. And finally, the notion of application to leadership. Fostering trust, fostering accountability, building high performance and resilient teams. Advocacy for your team enhances engagement, collaboration, and innovation. You build a culture of trust, open communication, and shared goals. Great leaders challenge assumptions, support their teams, and create a vision worth following. Leadership in 2025 isn't about doing more. It's about doing what matters most better. So in this presentation, I've created a reading list for you if you ever want to refer to these books. From Adam Grant, Brené Brown, Simon Sinek, Daniel Kahneman, Kim Scott, Greg McKeown, and finally Patrick Lencioni. Colleagues, thank you for attending. It is 1:30 on the dot. Any final questions or observations? Any comments?
Yeah, now the interesting part is doing the doing, eh?
Well, the interesting part is doing the doing.
Yeah.
And I think what's important is that just very, very quickly going back to the very first presentation we did, you'll see that there are 3 performance exercises. And you'll see that I'm asking you in a 750-word thought leadership piece to actually examine Masterclass 1 and Masterclass 2 in terms of how it applies to your workplace, so that you're actually in a position to unpack this stuff and start implementing. Trevor, I see your hands up, sir.
Yeah, I'm mindful of time, so Ivor, because I've also got someone waiting for you, I just wanted to say thank you. It was really great to go back to the scholarship thinking. You often forget a lot of these principles when when you leave it for too long, that you actually start looking at these, and it's good to see the updated thinking. I think what was missing at the end of the day is ultimately you can listen for as long as you like, you can apply, you can admit you're wrong, you can give credit, you can make a fast or a slow decision. But there has to be ultimately a hard decision that needs to be made at some point in time.
You have to call it.
You have to call it, and you're not going to please everyone, because what we didn't cover here is the different personalities.
Oh, that's
ultimately
coming.
Make somebody disappointed, and you got to live with that. And that's the real, I think, is how you live with that and how you continue to lead outside of that is really what makes the mark at the end of the day.
And I think, Trevor, also run the risk of losing people, even your good people. So you have to, at some stage, call it. You have to make a decision. And yes, you have to factor in you might lose that person, but for the betterment of the company as a whole.
Yep.
Thank you for that, sir. Thank you for coming. Thanks for going, Trevor.
Thank you.
Colleagues, thank you all for playing and for participating. Dave, I see your hand is up. Any comments there, sir?
Nope, all good. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you.
I have
sorry.
one comment quickly.
Yes, Aggie.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's all about the team. And I agree you should make every single team member understand that they're valuable to the whole contribution to your organization.
Thank you for that. And again, I just want you to focus on less commoditizing of reward when you do that, and more just the benefit of pure recognition, because you're never going to be able to pay enough or reward enough. Guys, thank you so much. And Tara, apologies for going 3 minutes over the time, but thank you all for attending. We will send out these presentations and the notes and the recording, and I look forward to seeing you in the next masterclass.
Great. Thank you, Ivor. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.